January 24th Mayor and Council meeting. And to top this off, I would like to ask Meg McClanahan to come forward and lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. McClanahan. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. The next item is Administration and Finance Department. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number one is the approval of an ordinance to adopt the amended and restated defined benefit retirement plan for the employees of the city of Roswell, Georgia, and this is the second reading.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend and restate the retirement plan for the employees of the city of Roswell, Georgia, in accordance with and subject to the terms and conditions set forth in the attached adoption agreement and the addendum to the adoption agreement, the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit System Master Plan document, and the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit Systems Trust Agreement. When accepted by the authorized officers of the city and GMEBS, the foregoing shall constitute a contract between the city and GMEBS, all authorized and provided for by OCGA 47-5-1. Be it ordained by the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, and is hereby ordained by the authority thereof, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference. And if approved, this will be the second reading.
Mr. Harner.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. This item was submitted to us for your consideration, this ordinance of adoption by the Georgia Municipal Employee Benefits System. And they administer for the city of Roswell and about 200 other municipalities in the state of Georgia our defined benefit retirement plan. As you know, we have two different retirement plans for our employees, depending on when that employee started with us. This one pertains to the defined benefit or pension plan that is currently in effect for employees hired prior to March 1st, 2011. The plan periodically, or the Georgia Municipal Employment Benefit System, periodically submits our plan to the IRS so that we may enjoy tax favored treatment for the plan. They last did that fully in 2010, but they've recently submitted it again and received a favorable determination letter. But one of the conditions for continuing with that tax favored treatment is that each of the participating organizations, again, Roswell is one of those, needs to adopt, do an ordinance to adopt the restated and amended plan. So it's for your consideration.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Harner? Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? Yes, ma'am, please come forward.
Is there a mic?
It's right there. Yeah, it's right there. That's it. You just...
Okay. Betty Price, 295 Broadmeadow Cove, Roswell, Georgia. I have not seen the actual ordinance before you. However, I just saw it on the agenda this evening. Having been on council when we first went to the defined contribution plan, I just want to make sure that everybody's fully apprised of the differences and that understands that many cities go bankrupt with defined benefit plans. And I know that at the time that we changed it, the defined benefit was only for those people who had started that way and not going forward. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the consequences of returning to a defined benefit plan for any other people other than those that were grandfathered.
Thank you, Mrs. Price. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? I'll bring it back to council. Additional comments from council? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item number one on the agenda.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Wilsey. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Next item is the city attorney's report.
Motion to, oops, sorry.
Have a recommendation
There
to
we
go
go.
to closure to discuss personal litigation and real estate.
Do I have a motion?
Motion for closure.
Motion by Councilmember Tizer to go into closure. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. We will go into recess, and we will come back to these chambers for the final two items. Thank you all for waiting through our recess. The next item, we've got 2 items on the agenda. The next item is a follow-up discussion to understand the challenges and inability to open the grounds of Mimosa Hall to the public. I'm not sure why this is on a council agenda. This is an ongoing issue with Mimosa Hall that I'll ask Mr. Leatherman to discuss in a minute. But we purchased Mimosa Hall approximately 3 years ago. We've gone through several budget processes, of which this council has approved numerous items. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Leatherman, but our charge to staff in the beginning was to stabilize the structure. So, Mr. Leatherman, will you take it from here?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that's correct. Mr. Malone is passing out a PowerPoint presentation that we put together to try to provide some background on Mimosa Hall. And I'll go through the background. Just want to give some context for generally the public process and how we go through the decision-making process. It's a little bit different and sometimes more challenging than private business or even private projects in that a private project is about potentially just what you and I want. It's through a couple of people. Usually you can make quick decisions with minimal complexity. As you drive at the community process in public facilities, we're driving at including the community in the decisions that we make. That means that we increase our time horizon and we increase the complexity. What that looks like from just a functional perspective is when you're looking at an individual process, you're generally communicating between a couple of different people. You can set goals, establish priorities, execute those goals, review and revise, and continue to go through. On the right-hand side, you look at kind of a typical park development process where we're engaging the community on a regular basis. It can be much more time-intensive as we process through what would be the master planning process or the park development master plan process. And that's where we're in with Mimosa Hall right now. We're in that public process and public engagement phase of what does the community want and what are they looking for. And that was set up in 2017 when we originally purchased the property. Sometimes we talk about different items within that decision-making process, and we call it government efficiency. But the reality is we're looking for ways for the community to engage with our goals and priorities as a community as a whole. We adopt a budget in groups, and that allows our community to engage in that process. And eventually we get to execution by staff. Staff is working our way through that execution process, and here you see the Mimosa Hall timeline of purchase in 2017. Through September of 17, October 2017, we had some of our first work sessions and stakeholder meetings that set the foundation for the goals and visions, and as the mayor referenced, also set the priorities for how we were tackling the budget process. We had a number of items in 17 and into 18 and then into 19 of how we were working our way through the process. And so in specific to Mimosa Hall, we start to look back at the original council meeting in 2017, and this was done by committee. And this was part of the public engagement process. This was the criteria, and we had 34 votes for the top criteria of tourism for the home. We had uses for the home of program events and facilities, but began to set the foundation from the community's perspective on where we should put our priorities. We also surveyed the residents in 2017. We had just over 700 responses, and this also set that additional foundation for the historic property and where we were driving. Question 1, how would you like to see Mimosa Hall used? Historic preservation, tourism. Question 2 also was a very big indicator of our priorities of how should we be paying for the future of Mimosa Hall. That was driven as a self-payment structure, meaning that we were collecting fees. We were looking at partnering with Friends of Mimosa, which we're underway with right now. We were looking at other sources, and lastly, the general fund. That really drove at how do we start to set priorities for the development of the property so that we could tackle the community's expectations for the fee structure and paying for it. In 2018, we provided an update to council where we reviewed what we were working on, and we also gave our next steps for where we were headed on the property. Essentially, we were working on a lot of health and safety issues on the property. We were looking at our certificate of occupancy for the first floor of the home and working our way through that development process, engaging the community with Friends of Mimosa and with others. We also looked at the risk assessment from 2017 that identified a number of issues on the property that we needed to address. The reality is that we value the public engagement process, and so we had to kind of protect in place some of these risks so that we could identify where we were headed as a community on the property, and then define what those master planning efforts would be, and then move forward in the development process. I'm going to touch on a couple of them. The abatement of these risks, or at least the protection of these risks, were completed in 2019, just before we opened the property, in conjunction with Friends of Mimosa for Earth Day. So some of those risks and hazards, we've got some entrapment risks and hazards on the property. We've got tree hazards on the property, and the ones on the left, and potentially you're right, depending on how you're looking at the screen, we put some metal grates over some entrapment issues that we found while clearing and grubbing the property. Reality is we still have assessments that we need to make on the property, so we're not sure if more of those exist, and we're concerned that they become entrapment issues for people on the property, and so we have to protect and mitigate against those as best as possible. We also have the issue of the pool on the property. This pool was originally a residential pool. It's currently covered based on the recommendations of our risk manager, but the reality is about 10 people die from drowning every day. Of these, two people are under the age of 14. This is a real risk on the property that needs to be dealt with and mitigated. However, we also value the public input process associated with how we develop the property. And so we've had a lot of conversations about the future of this portion of the property, and we're working our way through the public engagement process in order to identify what the future of this land should be, because we want to be sure to engage the community. We also look at ADA access issues of stairways and walkways. We look at hazards associated with the barn and the old garage on the property. While we've protected some of these things in place, they are real issues on the property that, while can be mitigated, we also want to make sure that we have a plan moving forward. We also look at trip and fall hazards of the walkway coming up to the front of the building, the walkway behind the building, and all of these things are part of our public discussion of how do we improve this property for the public benefit, but also do no harm in the protection in place process in which we are right now. The regulatory environment that we work in is also fairly significant. We have to recognize that there are potentially people in our community or outside of our community that would want to look at the property for potential poaching. I've had experience with this on other parks and facilities where people have poached Native American artifacts off of our historic sites and then sold them on the black market. We have the reality that we have not yet done our archaeological assessment of the property, which will be required when we start the grounds master plan. But this is something that needs to be completed as we move forward in the process. We also have the regulatory environment of the stream buffers, stormwater management, soil erosion, and other items as it relates to the development of the property. Again, we want to do the grounds master plan so that we can identify what these potential issues are so that we can move forward in the planning process and then execute on them through the permitting process here at the city. We have council priorities to consider, public property development. We also have just the general health and safety and welfare of protecting our residents on our public property. Again, another aspect that we take into account is we look at how do we provide access to the property and minimize the risk to the city. And so for the case of Mimosa Hall and our opening of the grounds by reservation with having staff on site, we took all of those risk management factors into play, the community engagement process, our council policies and directions, and made the identifying decision that we would open the grounds by reservation similar to some of our other facilities, which we did in 2019. Some other examples of that type of reservation system is the machine shop. We've got the river landing at Roswell. We also have other facilities such as Lita Thompson where we've completely restricted access to certain types of the facility or certain parts of the facility due to its risky nature of the public accessing it. And then we committed to continue to working on council priorities and community priorities. So this is the invitation that we sent out to the Mimosa Hall Gardens, and it is available by reservation and contacting my office. The advantage, too, is that we've got a number of events that are scheduled here in spring of 2020. We're going to be celebrating Earth Day again there on the property. We have the Mimosa Festival that's returning for a second year, and we're also hosting the Garden Club of Georgia out on this property along with our other historic properties. As it relates to the budget authorization, the mayor referenced this just a moment ago. we've been working through the budget priorities of the certificate of occupancy and the grounds master plan. We had our first stakeholder group meeting for the grounds master plan with Friends of Mimosa last Tuesday, and are committed to working through that process to bring a decision point to mayor and council so that we know that we're heading in the right direction based on what the community is telling us from 2017 and also what they're telling us now. 2021, we're prioritizing the certificate of occupancy, continuing the public input process. That will help us lead to the archaeological assessment, targeted improvements on the property, as well as a menu of fundraising opportunities for Friends of Mimosa. To me, this is also important. If you go back to question 2 of the survey from 2017 was, how are we going to be paying for this property? And the partnership with our nonprofit organization is a piece of that puzzle as we move forward in the process. I think it's also important to realize that as you step onto our historic properties, these properties weren't developed just in a year. They weren't developed in 2 years. They've been a process over time. And Mimosa Hall is no different. You see Smith Plantation in the history of the development of that property, as well as Bullock Hall in the development of that property, dating back to 1972, 77, and then moving through the last few decades. So these are significant projects. Anybody that's owned or managed a historic property will tell you the work is never done. It can be a process to get it started, but we are working our way through that. We're engaging the community along the way and feel that we have the results to demonstrate that we continue to progress on behalf of the community, on behalf of this mayor and council. Thank you.
Mr. Leatherman, I have a couple of questions or points to make. Please confirm for me that at the beginning of the year, when I was talking to you about budget requests for the upcoming budget, I believe I was very clear with you, and I said 2020 is the year of Mimosa. And whatever you need to have it in the budget, because it's very important that we get this house online. I understand the constraints, I understand the hurdles, and most of the hurdles, well, a lot of them have been funding that came from this council. So will you confirm that we had that conversation? This is 2020 is the year of Mimosa.
Yes, ma'am, we did have that conversation.
And then the other thing I would like to point out is on February 19th, you sent out a fairly comprehensive review of the status of Mimosa Hall and Grounds, a council information request. And I thought it was great information. So I am going back to my original point, and I'll make that point again. Mimosa Hall has been on numerous committee meetings. It's an ongoing committee topic, and I'm sure that we'll have many, many more of them. And it's been involved in numerous budget requests and budgets that this council has passed. So I don't know how this was elevated or what the urgency is to put this on a council meeting and circumvent the process. Perhaps Councilmember Palermo can enlighten us.
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, we're actually in agreement. This should be a committee topic, and I feel that's much more appropriate than at a council meeting. And I actually requested this be a committee topic for this Wednesday. That request was denied. And the reason why I feel it's important we are discussing this, I would have preferred Wednesday morning as I requested in a committee meeting where this is a more typical discussion. But the reason why I felt once that was denied, which I believe has not happened before, in the sense that typically if there's an opportunity for discussion at committee, there's always been that opportunity to have a discussion at committee. But nonetheless, why do I want to discuss this right now? So First of all, Mr. Leatherman, great presentation. Appreciate you getting into all these details, timeline, going through some of the challenges and the pictures with it, all very helpful. When did you put this deck together?
Over the weekend?
So, which again, I'm disappointed you had to do it over the weekend. If it was this Wednesday, you would have obviously had much more time, which would have been my preference. But I think that comes down to why I wanted to discuss it, because if we actually go back to the timeline slide, which is on page 3, so.
Sure. Take me a minute.
So really, the purpose for wanting to have the discussion is, it was my understanding that that some of the process, some of where we are is different than the expectations that were set at public meetings to the public, which things can change and there's a lot of good reasons for it and all that. But it's important to me that we have the citizens being aware of the status and all those details, because it's my understanding, and the irony is I tried to listen to the audio and the meeting actually for the November 2018 meeting, the audio was down. It was said that it was just an internal issue. I did try internal, but I actually then tried it on my phone as well, and it was having trouble, so I wasn't able to listen to the exact details, but happy to do that with anyone that would like to later on. But I'd like to go through what the discussion was and therefore what the surprise of some residents were. It was basically in February, the 2018 meeting, where the focus was the roof and the solar energy, which is so exciting. It could not be a cooler aspect of our historic home, what's being done. It was also discussed there of having the goal that the grounds would be open to the public by Halloween, October 31st. That goal was not hit, which is completely understandable. That happens for all the many different challenges that were given. So then in the November 13th meeting, that was discussed. And what was discussed was it then being opened up to the public in spring of 2019. And so we've heard the different challenges here and all these different aspects. And then what came about from there is the fact that you mentioned a lot of the discussion, a lot of the goals, and all those different aspects which are so important. And again, a lot of that came back to 2017, but at a public meeting in 2018, more than one, there was discussion that the grounds would be open. And then it sounds like the decision was made to have it by reservation only. And so basically, this is something that was a surprise to a number of residents, and I did remember it was different than the discussions at those meetings. So the reason I requested this on the committee meeting was I just wanted to make sure that there's really transparency on what is the process, where do we stand, and is this council fully up to date on all those different details, policies, et cetera. So those were the reasons. I guess what I would have liked to have seen is if it was clear that this council wanted to make sure the grounds were truly open to the public, just as Smith Plantation is, just as our many other historic home grounds, et cetera, are open. If there's challenges and risks, which you gave very serious risks on things that need to be addressed, what I think would make sense is just the public is aware of that, and then it gives us the opportunity that perhaps in an earlier off-cycle time or whenever the right time is, we can make sure to address those concerns. Because when I saw the update that the mayor mentioned on the email we got on February 19th, which was a little less than, so 5 days ago. Very helpful update, but that's where it seemed to me that potentially staff was going in a direction that was different than a lot of the discussion with council. And I just want to make sure that we're on that same page. Because for me personally, and as my votes and as my public statements always showed, my focus was the fact that back in 2017, the city, really taxpayers spent millions of dollars on this property. I wanted to see really how soon could we have residents being able to enjoy those grounds, and we definitely need to make them safe. But I felt this was a valuable committee topic, just to make sure that council's expectations are all aligned, the community's understanding and expectations are all aligned, and that's why I wanted to make sure we discuss this Wednesday, to make sure that staff and council and the community are moving forward together on the same vision, and that there wasn't the risk that there was one direction going, which was different than expectations or hopes from the community. So that's why I requested we have this discussion at committee.
Okay, well, one thing I would like to point out that Councilmember Palermo attempted to put this on an off-cycle committee meeting on Wednesday, which is not Recreation and Parks. Recreation and Parks committee meeting would be 2 weeks from this week, basically. And I don't understand, again, what the urgency is. There's some very good information out there. I know Mr. Leatherman has been meeting with Friends of Mimosa. And I personally think that this is not transparent because we've taken something out of the usual process to discuss it. I think this needs to be discussed at the committee meeting in 2 weeks. And I know this is only a discussion item, but I would support that we talk about it then. But it does not need to be talked about at an off-cycle committee meeting. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, well, a couple of things, I see the urgency. I do see the urgency because from the first minute that I walk into the property, I was a supporter of the property over almost 3 years ago. And I've been supported to buy the property, but honestly, I've never seen coming 2 years and 8 months, 2 years and 8 months, and still the grounds of Mimosa Hall are not open to the citizens of Roswell and taxpayers. So I do see the urgency because 2 years and 8 months, even for a public government, is a lot of time. Not even think about private, even for public. So, and no opening the grounds of Mimosa after 2 years and 5 months that we have a risk assessment result September 2017, which means that since 2 years and 5 months, we know what needs to be done on the grounds of Mimosa Hall to get it open to the public enjoyment. So given the time, I think that the long time bring urgency in a big investment made by taxpayers of the city of Roswell. So saying that this is one issue, and I think that is urgency, given what I just explained. Secondly, related to this is denying an elected officials adding a topic to the committee meeting agenda. I never went through this experience. On my last 4 years, I never was denied to put an item even outside the cycle. So was put at the end of the agenda, that's fine, I understand, it's put in toward the end of the agenda, but it's put in the agenda. It's the first time that I heard that an item is rejected, and I believe by, I don't know, our city administrator, Gary Palmer. I think he's the one who authorized or not put it on the agenda. So based on those two things, I think it's important that we talk about this. We talk openly about this because that is how we work on an inclusive engagement and responsive city government. So I think that bringing to the attention, and we did this as an example, when you bring to the attention, you bring to the focus, things happen faster. So this happened on East Roswell, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when we first organized a town hall meeting for economic development, and we brought the attention to the redevelopment of East Roswell, and now we all doing a lot of progress. So when you bring to the attention and the focus, I think that things happen faster. So saying that, I think that it's unfortunate that we're not discussing this in a committee meeting, but we had the chance to discuss tomorrow. I don't know if still we have the chance or not, but I think that bringing to the attention of the public is very important.
Let me reiterate, Mimosa Hall has been a topic of conversation for 3 years. Has it been long? Has it been painful? Yes. We've discussed it in the budget every year. What this boils down to is funding, and I will remind this council in our next budget cycle that you set this priority today. The other thing I would like to point out is, like I said before, discussing something off-cycle at a committee meeting I don't think is transparency. If people are looking at transportation projects, they're never in a million years going to think that Mimosa Hall is going to be on that agenda. There might be some folks out there that look at the Rec and Parks agendas, but they don't pay attention to the transportation agenda. But Having said that, this can be discussed at a committee meeting in 2 weeks. I don't think there's an emergency or any urgency to discussing it tonight or tomorrow or the next day, if we can have this conversation in 2 weeks and keep it in the proper process going forward. And to me, that is transparency, not what we're doing here tonight. I think there's another motive tonight. Yes,
So moved.
Councilmember Tizer. We don't need a motion. This is a discussion item. Is there anybody else that would like to comment?
If we're going to, are we going to discuss the issue or just discuss whether we should do it or not?
It's up to you.
Because I'd have to agree with you. You know, we've budgeted about $150,000 of additional money each year over the last 2 years for this, literally begging, borrowing to try and get to that number. I know because I had to come and ask for it. I think staff would agree that the grounds and the facility were in much worse shape than we had all estimated. Specifically, the grounds were in pretty bad shape. I think the Friends of Mimosa have done a great job of getting to where we are now, but if you look back at original kind of commitments, they had hoped to raise as much as $1 million. As much as $1 million, because I think the estimate to bring this home back and the grounds back to where it needs to be is probably somewhere closer to $2 million. And Jeff's pointing to a higher number.
Yep.
And so they've, you know, the Friends of Mimosa who thought, you know, we could get to $1 million have struggled and struggled. And finally, just last week or the week before, were able to get enough money to put the solar roof on the house. You know, we were in a position here as council this spring to have to put a regular roof on if they were unable to raise that, and thank goodness they were able to get there. And so it's been hard. It's been hard to find the private money that was originally committed to the citizens of Roswell that we try and get. It's not been coming very easily. That has certainly slowed down the process. The other thing that slowed down the process is this council and how much we're willing to put forward based on the original promises made to the citizens when we bought this. It's that simple. It's that simple. I don't see a single reason why we can't discuss this in 2 weeks other than a continued desire to avoid proper process.
Yes, again, proper process and protocol. This is, I think, the third time now this year. This was done on Friday afternoon. I don't think we received this in our email to 8:01 on Friday evening. Mr. Leatherman, how many hours did staff and yourself take to put together this presentation amid a very busy budget time and other things going on?
We ended up, on Friday, when I got notification that this was going to be an agenda item, we pulled 4 of our staff members on Friday from their tasks to work throughout the day to consolidate the information in the background. I worked about 15 hours over the weekend to get the presentation put together, and worked on it a little bit today, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 45 working hours to consolidate the information.
Mr. Leatherman, on top of that, last year when we went through the situation with Big Creek Park, we learned a lot about public participation in something, in decisions such as this. And will you talk a little bit about how it's important to make sure we're not doing things just to make to speed them up, to get stuff through, and to go through the proper process that we learned about last year?
Sure. So as Councilmember Zapata pointed out, since 2017, we've had the risk assessment on the property with the hazards that we needed to deal with in order to reasonably protect in place people accessing the property. And you know, I can look at the property from my experience. I've had the unfortunate experience of having people drown in my parks and facilities. I've stood at a podium like this in front of decision makers like you and had to explain what we were going to be doing differently from a policy perspective to make sure that that never, or that we can prevent that from happening again. You know, every single part of me wants to fill this pool in. I recognize it as a hazard, but the reality is that through the Big Creek process, this council valued the public input process on our public property and had me put policies in place that was going to guarantee that process that we would go through. And that's what we're in right now. And it's actually a very exciting process to start to look at different areas of this property and say, what can we envision for the future? How do we engage our community in helping to set that vision? And at the same time, recognizing that we've got some hazards in place like we do in so many of our other facilities. So how do we allow access to those facilities as reasonably amount as possible while protecting this council and our fiduciary responsibility to protect our risk and liability associated with it? That's why we have certain areas of the property locked off and why we want to have staff present in a reservation basis in order to have people on the property. It's to protect the property from the people and the people from the property. It's both. And eventually we will get a chance to move beyond that, but we want to be able to do that with the community's input. I want to be able to fill this room with people that say that we're on the right direction with the grounds of Mimosa Hall. And I don't want to fill the room with people saying that I filled the pool in without a transparent process because I was scared about what it could be in the future.
Well, safety, 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 looking at some of these pictures, looking at that, at some point it comes about trust as well, and trust in your staff and those to do what they've been given, the direction they've been given from council. And for me, the update that you gave to us via email was enough. I trust staff to move in the direction that the council's been given. If there's not a situation in which that's going, then maybe this process is warranted. But I applaud you. I applaud the Friends of Mimosa, and this is something that needs to stop. I mean, we've got to trust our people that are working here, and know that they're doing the right thing for all these projects. And I have no doubt in my mind we're on the right path here. So appreciate your work.
Okay, before I go back to Councilmember Palermo or Zapata, are there any other council members that would like to make a comment at this time? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I think it's very unfortunate to see that I think there's some up here that want to just disagree with each other instead of just really looking. So, and the reason I say that is because I think we're in agreement with a lot of the things, and there's just some key details that are being left out. And so, Mr. Leatherman, first of all, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm disappointed that you ended up feeling the need to have to do this. It's a phenomenal presentation. It goes far above what I wanted to discuss, and again, I appreciate it, but just want to bring that up. But also, I think what it comes down to, so the decision was, so this council, not just in one, but in two public meetings, showed strong support and public speaking of wanting to open up the grounds to the public so people can enjoy it. And there's risks that you've brought, that you've shown tonight that make it where it's not ready to do that. I totally get that. I trust your judgment on that 100%. My issue comes down to, again, really the process and what I truly see as the transparency around it. Was there an official vote by council and public comment from residents beforehand on the decision to make it so it's only through a reservation process?
So I think we're trying to split semantics on what open means. And we have a spectrum of open. The bottom line is 100% of our parks and facilities are closed as of midnight. So for me, the opening of a park and facility is, can people access it in a controlled, managed way? Sometimes we have open access to all of our parks and facilities. Sometimes we have to limit access to those parks and facilities. Lita Thompson is a great example. We have a house that's dilapidated in the center of Lita Thompson that is a significant risk to people, but we've closed that area with signage because ultimately the risk of potential death or dismemberment is fairly small. And so that park and facility is open, but it has restrictions associated with it. And so from my perspective, when we say open, there is a spectrum of operational decisions that we make. Our facilities are closed on Sunday.
And so
they're not open. Our facilities on Saturday are closed sometimes throughout the day. So if we really want to talk about that open statement, then I guess I didn't provide the clarity on where we were headed. And if that was necessary, I would have welcomed that conversation from the
exact discussion we had.
Please don't interrupt.
I'm being interrupted. So, Mr. Leatherman, some of the exact phrases that were discussed, we're talking about residents being able to just take a walk and walk through the grounds. It would have been a completely different decision in my mind to hear they can do that as long as they get a reservation ahead of time and all of that. So whether or not it's closed a certain day, the hours, those are something I see different as requiring a reservation to even use. But ultimately, what it comes down to is the fact that this is valuable information from a staff decision, and it's a staff decision that I trust regarding the risks. But what disappoints me is 1 year, 4 months ago, there was the expectation that residents were going to really get to enjoy it just a few months ago, and one day is not what the discussion was. And, at the end of the day, why was this urgent to speak about now? It's basically, residents paid $3 million 2 years, 8 months ago, and frankly, I don't want it to be 2 years, 9 months before it's decided a long-term plan. When can they actually go on an average day and walk the grounds? I'm fully supportive if staff is telling us because of these risks, they cannot have it fully open. Let's understand what the costs are, and that it was my understanding in the public discussions that was the priority on whatever the risks were. We would focus on that, but now I'm hearing separately, you mentioned there's a plan for inside the house, and that's separate from the master plan out here. Just bottom line is, it's different than what council had voted on and discussed, and the residents deserve to see that instead of having the idea that decisions are being made behind closed doors, not at public meetings around these policies.
I would like to add that I was involved in those meetings, and my expectations from those meetings are completely different than Councilmember Palermo's expectations of those meetings. I think those meetings were very open. We constantly said our number one priority is to stabilize the home. The grounds don't do us a lot of good if we don't have the home. And that home has been in peril with roof leaks, et cetera, so that's, and in open meetings, we have been dedicating money to this. So I don't understand where this lack of transparency is and why 3 years, 8 months, and 2 weeks is such an urgent issue over 3 years and 8 months, or 2 years and 8 months. So I keep going back to this. I believe we've created a problem here this evening that didn't exist. Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, the city, we did make a sizable investment in the property, a $3 million investment. We knew at the time that there were going to be resource challenges in bringing it up to a position where it would be a safe and positive, meaningful experience for visitors. I think over the past 2 years, we have made a lot of progress in managing what limited resources we had as far as funding and just basically time, energy, and manpower resources. So again, I appreciate all the work that you have done and the progress that we're looking forward to opening in April, and also with the Friends of Mimosa with the work that they've done to restore the roof.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, a few points here. I don't see this as creating a problem. We are looking for a solution to open the grounds of Mimosa Hall as soon as possible for public enjoyment. So I don't see negatively, I see more positively here to find two solutions to all these lists from September 2017 to resolve these issues and open for once the grounds of Mimosa Hall, which is, after all, is not building a rocket. It's just fixing the grounds to make it accessible and enjoyable for the people of Roswell. Point number one. Number two, and this is a question for our city attorney. Is it legal to add any elected officials to add items to the committee meeting agenda?
So council members can add agenda items to the committee, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So then, I want to really pay attention here because that is important what I'm going to say. they've been talking about proper process. And what I'm talking here is a legal process. Proper process depends who is talking about what is proper and what is not proper. When you talk about legal, it's a totally different story. If it's legal for any council member to add an item, I don't see why the city administrator, Gary Palmer, has authority to deny that. So again, bear with me, there's two different things. Proper process depends who designed the proper process or the interpretation, or who interpret the process, the proper process, and the other one is the legal process. I don't think, so then I want to make this point very clear, very, very clear, because we should be talking about legal process, not proper process. Because proper depends who say is proper, but legal is one way. So keep in mind this first. Second, or third now. So we talk about, when we bought the house, we knew it's two things. One is the structure of the house, and the other one is the open grounds. And we always talk about, getting these open, the grounds as soon as possible for public enjoyment. Then we can start where with the money for the solar roof, where is the money coming from this, for that, for the structure of the house. But it's two different projects on the same property. So taking 2 years and 8 months to fix a list of risk assessment results from September 2017, then some people might think it's urgent, some people might say it's not urgent, and maybe some people think it 2 years and 8 months is not a long time. Some people might think it's a long, long time to fix grounds for public enjoyment. So those are the points that I want to make, and I want everybody to understand, those points, because they're very important to clarify and synthesize this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Davidson, you've pulled up the code?
Yes, Mayor. So for the Community Development and Transportation Committee, which shall meet each month at a time and location set by such committee, and which shall address items involving community development and transportation, period. The mayor, city administrator, and following council member liaisons shall be members of the committee, Community Development and Transportation. Public Safety, and Public Works Committee is to address items involving public works and public safety. The Administration and Finance and Recreation and Parks Committee, which will meet and discuss items involving recreation and parks and admin and finance. Now, it does have other provisions in the ordinance that says that supporting documentation, no item may be added to a committee agenda after 48-hour time frame without a majority vote of the voting members. And then it says the other council members are free to participate and vote in the committee meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Councilmember Tizer?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very much looking forward to seeing where this council is going to come up with the more than $2 million needed to bring the House up to standards of where it needs to be. Very much looking forward to that. I think that's what we need to be focused on. I think focusing on who added what to a committee meeting when it's very clear that if you want to add it right now, that day, you get a majority vote and you add it. No big deal. But we've got a pretty sizable financial gap to fill to bring this House up to the standards we need it to be. I think that the thing to be prepared is a list of what those things are and the cost, which I believe might be in one of the reports that came from the appraisal companies, et cetera, that was distributed to this council about 1.5 years ago. I can't remember the name of that company, but I'm sure you could remind us.
Sure.
We're looking at a sizable chunk of money. That money's going to have to come out of somewhere. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how we put that all together.
Thank you. I'd like to get final comments from council. Councilmember Zapata?
Mayor, Mr. Leatherman, can you tell us the estimated budget for to open the grounds only? Not the house, the grounds. Do you have an estimated? I mean, we do have a landscape in-house personnel, so I'm sure that you may have an idea of how much it's going to cost to have a...
Thank you for the question. It's not a matter of landscaping costs associated with it. It's about how do we access the property from the public, and that is what the public engagement process is for, so that we can define what those future improvements want to be from the community. So at this time, no, I cannot give you a cost estimate to open up the grounds, because there's a variety of operational questions that would need to be answered to understand what that means. Because the last time that I said that we would open the grounds, my intent was very different apparently than some of the council's intent. And so I'd want to look at what that expectation truly means. We talking about 100% ADA access all over the grounds? Or what is that spectrum of access, and what does that truly mean in order to get you a correct cost estimate?
Additional final comments from council? Councilmember Palermo?
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So first off, want to remind that a committee meeting, nothing can get passed into law or anything like that from a committee meeting. It's the opportunity for discussions, which is why historically it's been very common to have a discussion there, knowing that any changes, any true decisions have to be made at a council meeting. And again, really a key point here is the fact that I believe the community and all the elected officials should have really the same amount of information when it comes to major high-level details. And it sounds to me like not all elected officials had the same amount and same level of details. And it seemed to me that decisions were being made without the full community just being aware of that. So at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that we're being as open, inclusive, and transparent as possible to just really understand what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and what is the time frame. And those things can certainly change over time. And as they do change over time, just making sure that there's proper updates to the community as well.
Councilmember Judy?
Again, I don't think this is about Mimosa Hall. This was about something else this evening. And to make a statement that staff is providing other elected officials information that others don't have is, I think, preposterous. I think we've got a very good staff here, and we've got to start trusting our staff and moving forward, and quit telling people that there are things going on behind closed doors that aren't. And you know, if not, we're never going to get anything done, because our staff's going to shut down. And so, you know, this has just been a conversation that didn't need to happen tonight. It was out of process, it was out of order, and here we are again.
Additional final comments from council? I would just like to make one final comment before we move on to the next item, and that is, you know, Councilmember Judy's talking about trust with staff. I'd like to see this council working together. I'd like to see this council communicating with each other. I'd like to see this council working to gain consensus on issues. And through that process, I believe that a level of trust among the elected officials can be built. But until we go down that road, I'm not seeing this as improving. I'm seeing it as being very detrimental to getting the city's work done. So the next item for discussion on whether or not council members can use an open city facility for town halls like 2017. And before we go on with this one, I would like to point out that this item has been in committee. It's going to be brought back to committee. I have absolutely no idea why it was brought up for discussion this evening. But once again, perhaps Councilmember Palermo can opine on that.
Thank you. So Mayor Henry, just as I had emailed about the other one, to you and the city clerk on Friday when I found out I was not able to bring this item to committee. I then requested it be on council. Basically, what I wanted at committee was I had one follow-up question that I do believe is urgent given what's going on, is I listened in detail to the committee discussion, and the discussion was the potential of council voting on and approving a potential policy around this, which I think is a fantastic idea. Basically, my one question that was really unanswered, and actually I even in the email I even mentioned, because the mayor, I emailed the mayor as well as emailing Mr. Palmer, even mentioned that, Mr. Palmer potentially could answer the question, and not only would this not be needed for the council meeting on Monday, nor the request for Wednesday, but it would just be, the question would be answered. The outstanding thing that was not clear was, prior to council coming up with a policy, are we going to follow what's been followed in the past, which was that a council member did have the ability to go ahead and have a town hall meeting at a city location. The request specifically was for at East Roswell Park, which was the exact location we had it in 2017. I want to bring up that for anyone that listened to the East Roswell Economic Development Action Committee, they brought up that actually one of the things that they watched and they paid attention to for information was the town hall that Councilmember Zapata and I had hosted. In fact, Councilmember Wilsey and Mayor Henry were both there as candidates, I believe, given the timing as well. So it was one that definitely was very open to the community. But again, why do I want to find this out and not wait until March? It deals with the moratorium and the many items that I had brought to the committee regarding changing our zoning around multifamily. It's something I want to really make sure that we're fully engaging the community, engaging the east side of Roswell instead of making everyone come here to City Hall. The fact that the east side of Roswell has been impacted by so many apartments being approved over the last few years. I want to make sure just really have that discussion, engage everyone. If this council deems that until there's a policy, there's not going to be the opportunity to engage with those residents and use a city facility, that's fine, but that was the one thing that was unanswered that I hope to get answered either over email or I'd hope to get answered at this Wednesday's committee. But when both of those were denied, is why I brought up the discussion for tonight. I think Wednesday morning it'd be a much more appropriate time to ask this question.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little bit confused. I thought I saw a calendar invitation setting up this very event. So I think, Mayor Henry, you've set it up, haven't you?
Councilmember Tizer, what I set up was the forum for East Roswell Economic Action Committee.
Yes. And so, if you want to bring this up on Wednesday morning, go ahead, get a majority vote, and we'll talk about it. There are some issues here that I think are very important. When we had the committee meeting, I believe you weren't able to attend for possibly business reasons. We tasked the city administrator and the city attorney to come up with a draft policy and bring it back to a committee meeting. I suspect that might take them longer than a week to 10 days to do. We're going to be at a meeting over on the East Roswell side of the city to talk about what the East Roswell Action Committee brought up. I'm sure a lot of those other issues can come up at the same time. And so if you want to bring this up Wednesday morning and talk about it, bring it up. Let's get a majority vote, put it on the calendar, on the schedule, or on the agenda immediately, and let's have that discussion. But to sit here and take up our time and staff's time is just wrong.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just in looking at the particular request that's here, which I believe is to host a town hall to discuss the moratorium and the specific UDC text amendments, I think everyone on council is very interested in community engagement on this topic. And I'd like to suggest that we take this as an opportunity to work together on what those community engagement opportunities are and to sit down. I know as part of the UDC text amendment reviews, there is a certain amount of public engagement. I think there's opportunities for us to do a little bit more outreach and education among the community. So I would suggest that we do make this an item to discuss on Wednesday morning and to discuss with the ComDev staff to see how we can maximize the opportunities for community engagement between now and the UDC text amendment reviews and the end of the moratorium.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilsey. The other thing that I would like to point out to everyone is I have the authority as the mayor of Roswell to have a special called meeting. I can call a town hall meeting and the entire council can be there and we can engage with folks regarding apartments. If anybody would have approached me to do that, I, of course, would have worked with them to make that happen. So to me, if we really want to get folks' input, I'd suggest that I call for another meeting and we'll look at the calendars, see how quickly we can have it done, and move forward from there. And we can all hear the input on what our residents are concerned about with apartments. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I do have one concern with that, but instead of addressing it tonight, I hope to address it Wednesday. But what I want to bring up is because, as Councilman Tizer just brought up, and which I appreciate and agree with, is there's the right on Wednesday morning to request the item. And therefore, the historic practice has always been until this week that if a council member requests a topic be on there, that it would be on there. That way it is advertised. Residents are aware of it. This council always has the ability to just vote to defer the topic. And if I'm going to bring it up either way on Wednesday, I'd much rather have it be an agenda item so people are aware. So again, this is a perfect example where I feel tonight there's been a lot of disagreement and butting heads, when in reality, I think there's no reason to disagree, and I truly believe there's a way for us all to be on the same page with the aspects. Question I have for Mr. Davidson, for it to be advertised, so I'd be taking, I'm hoping based off Councilman Tizer's comment and Councilmember Wilsey's comment that they'd be voting in support of the discussion on Wednesday. In an effort to advertise and to get the information out there, if this council took a vote, is there the opportunity to advertise this item for Wednesday morning's committee meeting, or at this point is the only way to get it on there if it's not advertised and there's just a vote? Or how does that work, Mr. Davidson? What are the options?
So the council has ultimate authority to do whatever they wish. If they vote tonight to put something on a committee item, as a committee item for Wednesday, they can do that. It is out of process, as we discussed before, but this council has the ultimate authority. They are just committees of the council. So if that's the wish of the council, you can do that.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So since we're talking, I hear a lot of public input. I don't know why we didn't have a public input on the previous items, and my question is, are we going to have a public input on this item, or we're not going to have it as we did on the previous agenda item? So point number one. Point number two is, town halls are very important, and I make sure when we talk on committee meeting to ask City Administrator Gary Palmer is going to be allowed town hall meetings while he's drafting the policy, the process, etc. And the answer was yes. And I said, I request information. Is this information would be provided, regardless of you finishing or not your process or etc. And the answer was yes. So, so what I want to make sure here again is that we cannot stop city business until the city administrator comes with a new process. So that is a point. So I don't see that why not we can move forward. Since we do conversation with the council, why not we can do also town halls, which is conversation with the council, you might not find much definition on Google, but town halls, you find tons of definition on Google's what this means, town halls meeting, and how popular they are in the United States, all across the country, to communicate elected officials with the residents and citizens of a city, a county, state, and the country. So, so those things, I don't want to stop moving forward with town halls meeting just because the city administrator, Gary Palmer, is working on a new process moving forward. So that is my point. And then, regardless of the information, I'm still waiting for a lot of information on the historic gateway project. I requested, I have it here, a few weeks ago now. I requested all the invoices. I requested a lot of information there.
Councilmember Zapata, you're off topic.
The,
This is a discussion on whether or not council members can use an open city facility for town halls, like in 2017.
Okay, so sorry about that. Let me go back. So then, so yeah, I mean, we have a very successful and Mayor Wood has one town hall meeting, very successful on East Roswell to discuss East Roswell economic development. We have tons of hundreds of people participating and engaged in this conversation. So not allowing town hall meetings is a big mistake. It's a big mistake if we want to continue accomplishing inclusive, engaging, and responsive government. So giving the authority to the city administrator to say yes or no to a town hall meeting, I don't think is proper. And I don't know if it's even legal, and I don't know if it's part of the process. So, so we need to, he can keep working as much as he wants to keep working on that, but we cannot stop, town hall meetings. Thank you.
I would like to point out that this council charged Mr. Palmer with looking at a policy. This was not at his directive, it was at our directive in the committee meeting. Councilmember Judy.
So, again, I think this is kind of dispersing information that is negative regarding this, but I think nobody has a problem with town halls. It's the process of a town hall. It's what taxpayers' money spent where, who's invited, whether it's just can one council person call a full town hall meeting and use tax money? Or do all council members have to be invited? What does that look like? And I think there's a process that has to be put through, and that's what we charged our city administrator with, to figure that out so we can so we know what that process is. I don't think anybody in the world has said we shouldn't have town halls. That's not true. And that's one of those things that say, well, we're trying to stop transparency, but that's not the case. So what we need to do is get this policy figured out as quickly as possible, and I have trust in staff on working on that to get us the proper protocol, and so we can make informed decisions rather than haste decisions based upon pressure.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. There's a number of items I want to bring up, but I want to save for Wednesday morning, because again, I think committee is the more appropriate time for this discussion, which is why I requested for it to be at committee. But I do have to clarify one important detail. There was the decision made to stop town hall meetings, and the reason I say that is because I requested a town hall meeting in, I guess it's 2020. I requested a town hall meeting in the last few months, and that request was denied. In 2017, when we requested a town hall meeting, we had a town hall meeting. I challenged this council to come up with any time they felt that town hall meetings were not effective. I challenged this council to see any time that they were a waste of facilities, of tax dollars. If that's the case, then I think we certainly need to address that with a policy. But at the moment, a council member is no longer allowed to have a town hall meeting. And the question is, should that stay until council approves a policy in place? Or should a council member continue to be able to have a town hall meeting the way that's done in the past until this council comes with one? But again, I have other things that I would want to address based on things that were said tonight, but I'd rather save it for Wednesday. So my hope is tonight we'd be able to actually, if the mayor supports and Mr. Davidson supports, I'd like to just vote for us to discuss this topic on Wednesday morning at committee, which again was my request on Friday.
Final comments from council. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, yeah, out of fairness, let's say that we never have a policy for conversation with the council. And this was done with no problem and approved by City Administrator Gary Palmer with no problem. So, and we don't have a policy on conversation with the council, but this went through and it's happening and is using taxpayers' money for this conversation with the council for hors d'oeuvres and other things. So, so again, out of fairness, if we're going to do conversation with the council without a policy, why we should be stopping a town hall meeting without a policy? I mean, it's just, common sense. Why you pick and choose what is going to be under policy and what is not going to be under policy? So I just want to point out this, and it's important. So you see the level of fairness here, and we have to keep it fair for everybody, for all 7 elected officials. We all were elected on a democratic vote. So, distinguishing between conversation with the council, we can do it even without policy, but that's fine. Then it's a town hall that we've been doing for many, many years, and now you cannot do it because it doesn't have a policy. Then, I mean, kind of make your mind, you do it all with policy or nothing with policy, but picking and choosing with policy and proper process. So then make it very hard to all of us, all 7 elected officials, to do the good job that we were elected to do.
Additional final comments from council?
Yeah, just one quick comment. Thank you. I think I remember Mr. Davidson was concerned about whether one council member was having a town hall meeting or many council members, and that dealt with whether it was using city funds or not. And I don't want to discuss it tonight because we've already taken up enough of people's time on this. But I think it's something that if you could be prepared on Wednesday to share with us Wednesday morning. I think there's a fundamental difference between any one person having an event and 6 or 7 people jointly having an event. And I remember you brought that up, and if you would be prepared on Wednesday to discuss it, that would be great.
Final, promise. So, yes, that is for our city attorney as well, that if the town hall is open for all 7 elected officials, if it will be any problem. Anybody can participate if they voluntarily, no mandatory, voluntary, and will not count for any absence or no absence. So if you can also prepare for the next discussion, if this could be open to all 7 elected officials, if they want to participate voluntarily. Again, I don't want to force any elected official to participate on something that they don't want. But I see that will be an important point to make during the conversation from the legal perspective.
Councilmember Zapata, I can answer that right now, and I answered it earlier, which is I have the authority to call a special called meeting. I can call a town hall meeting for this entire council to be involved in tomorrow. So that is doable. And so if we want to discuss other options, that's what we need to discuss. Councilmember Wilsey.
I would like to add on to that just some discussion and research by Mr. Davidson about the the role of council and our ability to speak as individuals, as is set forth in the charter. I think my read is that when, as an elected official, we speak as a body when at all possible. So I would just like to get a little bit more interpretation of how the charter is written as far as that goes, with the mayor as the spokesperson.
Councilmember Palermo.
So Mayor Henry, my question is for you and Mr. Davidson. Given we're going to be discussing this on Wednesday based on the comments I'm hearing, which is great, which again was my original goal and hope instead of tonight, I do want to ensure we can get it advertised so that it's clear it is on the agenda. Is there a vote that we could give or should give to direct Mr. Fisher to do that? Is that something that's legal and you'd recommend, or what do you two recommend?
I would recommend that you make a motion and get it passed to add it to the committee so we can get it advertised tomorrow.
So
Councilmember Palermo.
may I make a motion?
You may.
I'd like to motion to get this topic added to the to Wednesday's committee meeting so that it could be advertised tomorrow morning.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Palermo. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. We are adjourned.